I mentioned a few times in the first episode that I wasn't raised by my mother. I was raised by my aunt. And the reasons behind that are complicated, and it's sort of a long story. The ending, or the present day, to kind of spoil it for you, is pretty positive, and I intend to keep it that way, and I think my mother does too. But the road there, the road to where we are today, had a lot of ruts, a lot of pitfalls. It's been hard fought. To start, I should probably talk about life before I existed for my mother. My mother is one of two siblings. My grandfather and my grandmother weren't married. My grandfather has a very wild and insane history of his own, marred with a lot of drug use. He was born in the 20s. So, jazz was big. The jazz scene was kind of fraught with a lot of drug use. A lot of your old jazz masters were born of the jazz dens of the day, where drug use was just rampant. And, heroin was kind of the name of the game. My grandfather hung out with those people. He would tell stories of famous jazz musicians that he knew there in the black neighborhoods he grew up in through LA. He'd heard them get their start. And along the way, he lost all of his friends to the needle. And he was destined to go the same way. But his parents, specifically my great grandmother, his mother, she sent him to rehab. He had been in rehab a few times. Last time he went, he told her she was the only one who would go out and see him. My great grandfather wasn't having any of it. And so my great grandmother would go out and see my grandfather. And he told her once, he's like, look, if I backslide again, I'm going to shoot up enough to take myself out. That was the harsh reality for him. This shit was so terrible and so disruptive for his life, that if he got clean and got it back into his system again, he was gonna check out. So he got clean, and as a result, went in the complete opposite direction. And so out of his drug state was born this radical health guy. But my grandfather was still crazy and not the kind of person who should have had children. He had demons, seemingly just from childhood, maybe leftovers from drug use, and he was not a stable person. He would have done very well to be analyzed, get therapy, get help. He's a prime candidate for that. But us black folk, for those of you listening who aren't black, there's a stigma in our community that kind of says you don't do that. There's a stigma against getting that kind of mental help. I think that's slowly lifting, but it's still sort of a thing. Black people, we don't go to the house. We deal with our own problems. That's the kind of attitude, and especially in his day, that was really the attitude. So he was probably the last person who should have had children, but he met a woman, my grandmother. He had been kicked out of the house basically because he and his father, my great grandfather, fought, and my great grandfather was having health issues. He would eventually die of a heart attack. The doctors were saying, "You got to get your eldest son out of the house." They were saying this to my great grandmother, like, "You got to get your eldest son out of the house because he's going to kill your husband sooner by stressing him out so much." My grandfather was forced to leave, and when he came back, he brought 2 kids. My grandfather, when he was a parent, was harsh. And he was harder on my mother. My mother was more stubborn, but it was no reason to come down on her the way he did. Not being shown patience, not being shown what good parenting was, other than some examples from her grandmother. My mother grew up, became an adult, and didn't have the life skills necessary to raise a child of her own. She really wasn't a candidate to be a parent. And a lot of people aren't. A lot of people have kids and really aren't ready, and then, they get ready. So that's not a wholly terrible thing to be. It's just what you do from the point at which you find out you're going to have a child that kind of determines the future. Growing up and spending time at my grandmother's place, her mother, spending time there, she knew the people in the neighborhood and the people they hung around and stuff. And there were some brothers that lived across the street, this kind of family of boys that lived across the street. My mother had a crush on one of the other brothers, not the one who became my father. She was in college and hooked up with him. Oops, I'm pregnant. Now, she wanted to get me taken care of. She wanted to have an abortion. And the only reason why I'm sitting here today is because my aunt, her sister, my mother's sister, and my great grandmother played the religion card and said, God doesn't want you to do that. And you should have this baby, and it's a blessing, and you should have the baby and take care of it. So my mother was effectively guilted into having me. The problem was she was, of course, still in college. Now, my mother wanted to take me. My mother went to UC Davis. Kind of the idea of taking me, that didn't go over too well with my great grandmother and my grandfather. There was a lot of back and forth, and effectively what they came down to was, leave Josh here, go finish school, and then come back and proceed with raising your child. And so my mother finished school, did not take me there. When school was over, my mother came back. My grandfather wasn't pleased with my mother having me. And what was so funny was my grandfather was so warm to me as a child growing up. It was years before I heard so many of the stories of my grandfather, his abuse to his kids, his molestation accusations, that he was a child predator. I had a completely different perception of him from other people, and he wasn't, among his siblings, he was not particularly liked because, one, he had tried to diddle some of them. He did in a couple of instances, and his drug abuse was disruptive. His fighting with their father. There was so much about my grandfather I just didn't know until years later. He was not kindly towards my mother, and they fell out. And my mother wasn't ready to take charge of me. And she was also, not only was she wasn't ready like financially, she didn't have her shit together yet with her life. There was that aspect, but there was also the patience in raising a child, the patience you have to take care of a child. That was not a part of her programming. It wasn't there, even to the point of when I was an infant, I would cry and she couldn't get me to stop and she would start to shake me. My grandfather effectively kicked her out of the house, and kind of kicked her to the street and said, "You need to fend for yourself. And Josh is staying here. You're not taking him into the gutter with you." And so my mother went off to figure out her life, figure herself out. She was with a man who at the time he wasn't anything to write home about, which was also part of my grandfather's distaste. I remember I had a high fever. I couldn't have been more than 3 years old. I was sick. I had a fever. My grandfather had ideas on how to make me better and what to do. And he and my mother started arguing. And I remember I was in the bathtub and I was left in the bathtub. And I remember getting out and walking to the kitchen in time to see my mother. My mother had picked up my grandfather by his neck and had him pinned against the kitchen wall. And she was screaming all of the things that she wanted to say to him for decades that she couldn't, because he was so hard on both of his kids, but he was especially hard on my mother. And if there was a grade that she got in school that wasn't up to what he felt was her best, he would lay into her with the whip. If she, came in 1 second too late from playing outside, the whip was the belt, something, a switch from outside was always at the ready, and he laid into her. So in that moment, that was her retribution. That was payback for all of those years. Unfortunately, it had to happen in front of me, so it left a very strange image. And from that point, my mother was in and out of my life. And she would pop in, and when she would pop in, it would be disruptive. And I didn't really have a relationship with my mother, so when she would pop in, it was like this foreigner. There are so many examples of these brief periods of time spent with my mother when I was very young. I won't bother going through all of them because, let's face it, it's the past. The most hurtful one, though, I will tell you, because it speaks to what we both have had to leave in the past and how we've had to work to have a relationship now. And she says this is, out of everything, the thing she regrets the most. One day, my mother picked me up. I think she just wanted to spend time with me, and I was still very young. We went out to the valley, and this was during the summer, so it was hot, very hot, as I remember. And she had to go to a job interview. And why she picked me up and then had to do the job interview, and knowing that taking a child into a job interview is not something you can really do, I don't know. We get to this sort of office park, this building. She parks the car and tells me, she says, "Mommy's got to go in this building for a while. Just stay in the car." And It was hot. It was really hot. This car was old. It was an AMC Javelin, if anyone out there knows their cars. It's an AMC Javelin, and this thing had vinyl seats that, you burn your legs and shit. No air conditioning, of course. And the windows were cracked, but, they weren't down terribly far. And added to it, I was a little kid. I was in the back seat. And getting out of the car was tricky because the car was old, and so the doors were kind of hard to open. And I was okay to start, but then I was out there longer and longer. My mother's going in for a job interview. I'm out there longer and longer. The car's heating up where she parked. The sun's kind of beating down into the car. And now I'm burning up, and it's torture. And I couldn't get out of the car. Couldn't get the windows down. And now, I'm a little kid. I'm crying. I'm screaming my head off because I'm burning up in this car and I can't do anything about it. And a guy who happened to come out of that building, he came out and he was looking through the window. He was like, where are your parents? Where's your, mom? Where's your mommy? Where's your daddy? Whatever. I pointed at the place where I saw her go, and he ran in there and she came out. And I remember her pulling me out of the car, picking me up and holding me and arguing with this guy because he had come in and he was making, threats like, lady, you should be reported. Like, how could you? It's boiling hot out here. How could you leave your child in the car? That's child abuse. And I don't remember what happened right after that. I don't know if that interrupted your job interview. I don't really remember what happened after that. That was the worst memory I had of my mother. And so going forward for years, that memory would come up when I would think about my mother. And so when people would ask, well, why do you live with your aunt? Why don't you live with they never asked about my father. They always asked about my mother. I said, well, why don't you live with your mom? Where's your mom? And all throughout elementary school, I told the kids in school my mother was dead. I said she died, and that's why I live with my aunt. That's what I told them. Because I couldn't stand the idea of this woman who had left me in a car. She left me in a car to burn. She left me at home as a very young child alone, who I could have burned the house down had I have not been smart and knew not to turn the stove on. A woman who would just dump me off with her boyfriend's family. She would take me out with, she and her friend would get together and she would forget to feed me. I went one weekend, I didn't get fed. I went a weekend. I did not eat because my mother did not think to feed me. And so in elementary school, I would tell kids, my mother's dead. I got older and I had to deal with my mother because my aunt she was a guardian, but she wasn't a legal guardian. So interacting with my mother, I just had to do. And so my mother could come pick me up anytime. There was nothing you could do to stop her. She was still my legal parent. I didn't know anything about my father. I have one picture, literally one, of him taken in the late 80s, like 89. That's the only picture I've got of what he looks like. Except for the memory of when I was a teenager, one of these visits with my mother that culminated in me spending time with my grandmother. And my grandmother said, "Hey, why don't you go see your father? He lives down the street." And I said, "I don't want to do that. I don't want to see him." I was still not in the best place with my mother. I didn't want to see my father. My father had disowned the very existence of me. He said, "Well, that's not my kid. You must have fucked somebody else. Had a kid that's not mine." Even though it's very clear that I come from that stock. When I look at the Brazils on Facebook, it's very clear where I came from. And so my grandmother took me down to his house and knocked on the door. "Adrian!" And he came to the door and he looked at her and he looked at me and he knew who I was. And he played dumb. "Oh, who's this?" "This is your son, Josh." And he just looked at me. And I looked at him. I had nothing to say to him. I didn't fucking care who this guy was. He's a non-entity. Didn't care. And my grandmother left me at his house. "Well, get to know your son." She left me down there. He didn't talk to me. Not really. The only thing he said was, "I was about to feed my dog, so I got to go up back. So if you want to come, you can walk out of the front door and walk around the house to the backyard." Didn't want me to walk through his house, this little, cracker box house. Didn't want me to walk through it. So I went to the backyard and he had 2 pit bulls and they were tied up. And of course, when they saw me, they went fucking berserk. These were the stereotypical kind, the stereotypical black person pit bull. That's what these 2 dogs were. And they were large, they were loud, and they were angry. And I was looking at him, I was kind of wary. And he walked up to him and he was like, "Yeah, man, look, I'm gonna untie these dogs." And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I'm gonna untie my dogs. So, you better leave because I'm gonna untie my dogs." He was like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons. He threatened to release the hounds. And that was my last interaction with my so-called father. I said, "You know what? Cool." And I left and I walked back to my grandmother's house and she said, "Oh, you're back. What happened?" I said, "He threatened to release his dogs on me." "Oh, well," and she made excuses and I said, "I'll never go down there again." The opportunity to reconcile with my father, that door was closed. The opportunity to reconcile with my mother basically stayed out of my life for quite a while until I got towards the end of high school. She made an appearance again, and it wasn't good. It didn't have a good ending. My aunt, the aunt who raised me, was not happy that my mother was going to be coming back in my life. I was at that teenage point when I didn't know how to make peace, and so I just knew how to argue. And so my situation with my aunt at home was bad, and then my relationship with my mother fell apart again, at the same time, culminating in a call where we screamed at each other on the phone, and I taped it. And literally, I talked about in the first episode these mental tapes, playing back old tapes. Well, this was a literal tape recording that I made of this phone call. And as I did with the mental tapes, I played it over and over again because my mother said awful things to me that she had no right saying to me, not having been a parent to me at all. And only she was an absentee parent, and when she would come in, she would try to give me something in order to make up for the parenting she hadn't done. And that attempt at a relationship crashed and burned. And then I left my mother alone for years. I didn't talk to her. She called me once. She found out my cell phone number. She called me, and she was crying, and I basically just hung up on her. I said, I don't want to talk to you. I hung up on her. I had gotten a call that she had almost died. She was bleeding internally, and she had almost lost her life. Didn't call her then. I got the news through other family members and, kind of gave my condolences and moved on. And it wasn't until I moved out on my own that my mother then reached out to me. And I thought, well, if I'm going to make an attempt, I'm going to have to put the past in the past, and I'm going to have to make an attempt. But it really wasn't, 100% heartfelt, because I didn't trust her. I didn't really have trust. It felt like the thing I was supposed to do, not for any religious reason. I'm not religious. So I don't have the fear of God, honor thy mother and all of that. I don't have that. I felt it was the right thing to do. We started our relationship building over again, and it was okay. I didn't really 100% trust my mother. My mother would make promises to me. She would break them. She would, overpromise, underdeliver, that sort of thing. And I kind of chalked it up for, to par for the course. And finally, we had a major argument. My mother was overstepping boundaries that I had not clearly defined. And I blew up at her, told her to get the fuck out of my house. We had a major argument, and after that our relationship it stalled. I was cordial with her after that, but then it stalled and it broke off entirely. We tried to start it up again, and I told her, I'm not doing this arguing thing. I'm not here for that. It was working, but this go round coincided with the start of my mental break, where I was slipping more into depression. And so little things from the outside, someone trying to pick at me for something, any kind of disruption would cause me to just flip the fuck out. I had a conversation one evening with my mother, and I was trying to be positive, tell her about, something I had tried to cook that didn't go well. I was trying desperately to hold on to my mental sanity. And my mother started picking me about my weight, what I ate, spots on my face that might indicate some health issue. And I lost my shit. I didn't have the mental defense. I didn't have boundaries set. And my mother didn't understand what I was truly going through. And I completely cut her out. I cut her off. I blocked her number. I blocked her email. I sent her an email and said, don't contact me ever again. And, my mother thought she knew that I was dealing with depression. Because I had told her at that point, this is what you're doing to me, and this is how this is affecting me. And so she knew at that point that I was dealing with depression. And, she was concerned, and she was calling my aunt, is he okay? He sounds like he's going to kill himself. And I wasn't. I had no intention of doing that. But what I did instead was start eating, just overeating, hoping that I would just have a heart attack and die. I was so through. Life at that point had been, I tried to make it with my mother. It failed. I had tried to progress in my career. It had failed. I had tried to start a YouTube channel that failed. Like, everything that I touched turned to shit. And I was like, fuck it. I'm not going to put a bullet in my brain, but I am going to eat this hamburger. And I'm going to eat this fucking thing every goddamn day until I have a massive heart attack and die. And then I'll be gone and I won't have to deal with this bullshit anymore. That was my mental state. Like I said in the first episode, it wasn't until I listened to some other people talk about their mental health. And it really wasn't until I read Jennifer Lewis's book that I was able to understand my own mental health shortcomings, that I needed to get help. Her book, and the book is The Mother of Hollywood. It's an excellent book. Even if you don't know who Jennifer Lewis is, she's a sassy black woman, grand, she's marvelous. Even if you don't know who Jennifer Lewis is, get the book. Get the audiobook. Listen to that woman tell her story. It is brilliant. And the thing of forgiveness, because Jennifer Lewis had issues with her own mother. And I wouldn't have been able to go back and forgive my mother for everything without Jennifer Lewis's book. Because I had heard the expression over and over again, you forgive people not for them, but for you. And plenty of people had said that to me. I can't even tell you how many people had said that to me. But my anger, and then just, I don't give a fuck about her. My whole attitude changed when I listened to Jennifer Lewis's book. And it's like, you know what? I need to work through this. I need to go through it. I need to face it head on. And I need to forgive this woman. My mother, there was so much that you wouldn't wish anyone to go through. And so, yes, mistakes were made, and who hasn't made them? And I cannot hold her hostage in my own mind for that for the rest of my life, because it's going to make me sick. It's going to make me ill. It's going to mean that I can't heal and move forward. So after reading Jennifer Lewis's book, my mind was in the right place. The opportunity to reconcile with my mother and start anew a relationship came at my uncle's birthday party. He always has this big, huge bash. My uncle's gay, and so he has all these gay men, and there's all these men's up in the party. But, they're actually, no, I was gonna say they're older, and some of them don't look. No, you got some fine men up and through there. Because my uncle's a super fucking sexy dude. I'm not even gonna try to skip on that one. He's a super handsome guy, super sexy. My partner looks at him and drools. I'm like, I was like, all right, you can go over and take it. I've heard some stories about that uncle too. That dick. Okay. I can't go there. I can, but I won't right now. But my uncle has this party, this huge, bash, and my partner and I, we wanted to know because it's kind of a gay thing. I mean, there are a lot of gay men there, so we wanted to be there. And so my uncle said, hey, it's on this date. Come on over. And so we did. And, I was driving there. I was like, I'm wondering if my mother's going to show up because, I know sometimes she avoids the family functions. And she came. And now this is my mother's family. So my grandmother's family, for my mother, there are two sides. So there's the aunt that I was raised with, that's my mother's father's family. So the gay uncle is my mother's family. And so I get there, I get to the street, parking is scarce, and my uncle got money. You know what I'm saying? So he's got shuttles, like these guys in these SUVs. You know, these handsome guys driving these SUVs up and down the hill that he lives on to shuttle people to his house so you don't have to walk up these fucking hills. And, you know, I'm big. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to walk up this goddamn hill. I'm going to be out of breath. It's a steep hill. And so I park, and of course, right where there's a parking space, there's my mother. And I was looking for the car I recognized, but in the interim between us not talking, she got in a new car. So I see this, you know, skinny woman, because my mother she's had bariatric surgery, she lost all this weight and stuff, and I had already known that. It wasn't a shock to see her because I had seen her that way already. But I see this little white Honda Fit and this skinny woman. I'm like, who is this? Because I didn't immediately recognize her, and then I'm like, oh shit, that's Mom. And so I pulled up, and she was like, what? I thought you weren't talking to me. And I said, look, we're here together. We gonna have a good time. Because it was about to be some mess in the street. I'm like, I'm not having it. I'm not having it. I'm not hearing it. And so we got to the party, and I came in, and I gave my mother a hug. She was like, well, at least give me a hug. And I said, yes, I'm gonna give you a hug. And she said, well, I know you hate me. I said, I don't hate you. I don't like where we were, and there are a whole lot of reasons for that. So we talked at the party. I aired my grievances there in short form and got quickly to the point. I was like, this is what I didn't like. This was my mental state. You know, it wasn't great. We hashed that shit out at the party and had a good time, and have been in communication ever since. We did Thanksgiving together. We did a family function at Thanksgiving. We talk on the phone. I have strict boundaries, and I know my mother. I have boundaries that I speak up when they're crossed. And she said, but Joshua, I'm just trying to tell you, I'm your mother, and I'm trying to love you. And I'm like, I understand. I love you too, but boundaries. And so I immediately throw up the boundary flag when required. And, you know, our relationship it's a work in progress, but it's positive. It's very positive. I text her, I try to reach out at least once a week via text. You know, if you call her, it's gonna be, woo, child, you're gonna be on that phone for a couple hours. So I try to, you know, text her once a week. Hey, checking in with you. She's gone back and she's getting a master's, and she is on a mission, she says. She is on a mission to do what she needs to do in her life so that she can be of assistance to me if I need help, whatever. And I think that's wonderful. It's fantastic. We have not the past to work through, we have the future to work through together and move forward together in a way that we can remain in each other's lives and not ever let what happened before break that connection. I don't want my life, my mother's life, to end with us not being on the best terms possible. I'll tell you straight up, the last conversation I had with my mother, I was on the phone with her. She had said some stuff. I was like, no. And, you know, it wasn't an argument, but, you know, it was a little heated for a couple seconds, a little bit. And I had to squash it. I had to say, okay, I understand. She's like, I said, I heard you, and I understand, and I love you. Now, I don't agree. Well, Josh, well, where are we supposed to go from here? I said, that ain't nothing but some words. I said, we'll go forward. We are going to go forward. We are going to end this call on a high note. I'm not about to end this call on a negative note. I understand. I don't agree with your statements, and I would like to move forward, please. So he was like, well, I'm just here. Well, maybe I say things. And, then she'll be like, well, I'm just trying to say I love you and just let me love you. I'm like, okay, that's good. I understand. Stay within them lines, girl. So yeah, we make it, we make it work. And we try very hard. It's always a work in progress. So we'll have Christmas together. There's always a Christmas function. The gay uncle, always has a nice Christmas soiree. So we'll be there together, and we'll have a good time. And we're going to enjoy life. We're going to enjoy being in each other's company, and see what the future brings. If you enjoyed what you heard, you can reach out to me and tell me what you really think online. You can reach me on Facebook at This Is Josh Pod. You can reach me on Twitter at This Is Josh Pod. Yes, I got the same @ tag thing for both of those social media platforms. I'm a lucky man. You can also email me at thisisjoshpodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit my website, which is thisisjoshpodcast.com. Do you see a theme here? I made it very easy for you to remember where you can find me online. So reach out to me, say hi, say what's up, say you love the podcast, say you hated it. Haters, lovers, all welcome. If you have a topic that you'd like me to discuss on this podcast, let me know. If you have stories that you'd like to share, I would love to hear from you. So until next time, I don't have a closer. I really should have a closer. See, folks, not perfect. Absolutely not perfect, but I'm working on it. Thanks for listening.